They're the ones that had asked to have this up here. Like I say, this traveling road show has been going on for 2 years now with a core group of us from DNR and Clemson Extension, but the Indian Creek Initiative wanted to have us up here, so that's what we're here for. And I also like to thank Ted Rainwater is here in the blue Quail Forever shirt. Quail Forever sponsored this today. They brought our snacks and all that good stuff. So with that being said, I am Michael Hook. I'm the small game program leader for the state. I am not a forester. I'm giving a forest management from Bobwhite's talk because that's what we deal with a lot of in South Carolina. We don't deal a lot with agriculture in South Carolina as far as from a Bobwhite standpoint. Most of my dealings with landowners is with forestry. I'll go out to a piece of property. They got trees. They're trying to manage trees. Either they just had, trees and they don't know what to do with them, or they're actively managing for forestry. But either way, that's primarily what I'm dealing with. And this talk's going to be a lot like TJ's. It's habitat to habitat to habitat. It's a lot of the same structures that you're looking for Bobwhites, just at a grander scale. So, like I said, but just with that being said, I am not a forester. If we got forestry questions, we're asking Jamie. So, like TJ said, what are the limiting factors for quail? It's brood habitat and nesting cover. More often than not, when I go to a private landowner's place, the bigger limiting factor is brood habitat. Most of the time when folks think about bobwhite habitat, they think of the pretty magazine cover with the tall pines and all the grass underneath it. So they'll build their property and have acres and acres and acres of grass. And you're thinking, well, that's great. You got good nesting habitat. Where are they taking the chicks? They forget about the weedy, nasty looking brood habitat. And oftentimes you're missing that escape cover too. That's pretty integral too. But so how do you get this nesting cover and brood habitat? This is a pretty good example, and it's similar to what TJ was saying. You want it interspersed. You want the forbs mixed in with the grasses with the escape cover somewhere close. But how do you get it? How do you want it, in a forested system? You got a bunch of different options. Obviously, like Corey was saying, tight, no canopy, or full canopy, no sunlight hitting the ground. You're gonna have to do some timber harvesting to allow that sunlight to hit the ground. Because as I mentioned a couple minutes ago in that gentleman's question about longleaf or loblolly, the quail don't care. They're interested in what's on the ground underneath those trees. You got to get that sunlight to the ground. Prescribed burning is a key aspect to bobwhites. They're called the firebird for a reason. Everything revolves around disturbance when it comes to a bobwhite, and prescribed fire is one of the cheapest and easiest ways to get that disturbance taken care of. You can use selective herbicide applications where appropriate. Sometimes when you're having to fight sweet gums, you lose control with the fire, herbicide's your only option. You can be pretty surgical with herbicide. You can pick and choose which plants you want and which plants you don't. You can tailor those herbicides to get all your grasses gone, to leave some grasses. It's pretty cool what you can do with herbicides. Woodland openings. As we've talked about a couple times today, variety is a key. It helps to have these woodland opens across your property. It's an additional habitat that wasn't there otherwise. Woodland disking. Please, if you take anything out of today, that woodland disking or disking in an agricultural setting, just dropping a disc in general is one of the best things you can do for bobwhites. Daylight and roads, it's just what it sounds like. You're creating additional habitat where you might not have been using it otherwise. And then reforestation, like Corey said, when you clear cut a property and you start rebuilding, the way you put your trees in is going to have effect on the birds. So let's look into these. Drive down any highway in South Carolina and you're gonna see this. Tight loblolly stands, shaded out. Where is a bobwhite gonna make his, where's a bobwhite gonna make his living in there? It's hard, man. Not a lot of food, not a lot of cover. And right now we've got Cooper's hawks starting to migrate in, and they love a place like this. They can perch up in there and they can absolutely wear out any bird that walks through this little alley. It's a death trap for them. So what do? Start doing some selective thinning, getting the sunlight to the ground. Most of the time, that first thinning you do, it's not putting a lot of habitat on the ground for the birds. It's a good start, it's necessary. You know, it does make you feel a little bit better from a bird standpoint, but you're not creating a great deal of habitat. Your bigger bang for the bucks could come a little bit later in the stand's lifetime. You know, you can do a couple things to help that. You can do these variable intensity thinnings where you're feathering the edges. Say if you have an agriculture field, thin a little bit heavier next to the field and leave your higher density in the middle of the stands. You're trying to just create a little bit of additional habitat. I mean, bobwhites don't need a lot of habitat. They just need some here and there across your property. So if you can forego just a hair on your road edges or just a little bit on a field border, just like I say, anytime you're getting a little bit more sunlight on the ground, you're doing a little bit better for the birds. You know, a good balanced basal area for wildlife in general is that 70 square foot range. You know, it's not great for quail, but it's enough sunlight hitting the ground that you're getting some ground covered, you're getting some food, you're getting some escape cover. If you really want to ramp it up for bobwhites, you got to drop the basal area even lower. And this is, you know, we're talking to just a tree or two across the landscape. That 35 to 50 square foot basal area is what you're aiming for. And when you start targeting these basal areas, one thing to remember is if you cut it to 50 this year, within a couple of years, it's going to be up 60, 70. It's a continual fight to keep basal areas where they are. The only way to keep them where they are is clear cut it and maintain it as a field. Those trees are constantly growing, that basal area is constantly changing. And it should be noted that thinning is a good time to implement any of these other quail-friendly practices. A lot of times you'll come to a piece of property and I'll have 100 acres of 15, 20-year-old pines, and the landowner will go, what can I do? I'm like, add a little diversity. First, we're gonna do your first thinnings, but then put in a couple, you know, wildlife openings, put in some openings, daylight your roads. This is the time to do it. When the logger's there, make hay. Once you start opening up your timber, it's time to start burning. A lot of folks will burn when they get that heavy density of timber, and that's fine. You're not doing a lot for wildlife. Once you start getting sunlight on the ground and you start burning, you'll start seeing habitat. It's a source of disturbance. Like I say, anytime you're disturbing the ground, you're making wildlife habitat. We mostly, for a long time, we said a 3-year burn rotation is what you were shooting for bobwhites. We've recently, more and more, I'm going to telling folks a 2-year burn rotation. You can stay on top of the burns a little easier. You don't have the sweet gum encroachment a lot of times. And generally, if we say we're going to do a 2-year burn rotation, something's not going to go right. It's going to have to be pushed to the next year. Then you're looking at 3 years. What happens with the 3-year burn rotation is you say you're going to hit it every 3 years, something goes wrong, then you're looking at 4, and then all of a sudden your sweet gums are 14 foot tall. You can't burn them or can't kill them by burning them. You got to bring in herbicide. So like I say, go into that 2-year rotation, you get a little bit more wiggle room. You're getting a lot more bang for your buck habitat wise. The key to that is you want small burn blocks. Scale is super important when it comes to burning. You don't want to burn your whole property at one time. Break it up the best you can. Ideally, I'd like to do 20, 30, 40, 50 acre burn blocks. A lot of it's dependent on the size of your property. If you got thousands of acres and it's just more advantageous to burn 100 acres at a time, okay, I get it, that's fine. Especially if you can make them long and skinny. If you've got 10 acres, break it up into 3 sections. Do 3 acres, 3 acres, and 3 acres. You just don't want to eliminate all of the habitat at once. So if you can create that patchwork burn map, that's what you're looking for. Growing season burns. We get a lot of questions about growing season burns. You know, in South Carolina, our fire season starts in February, maybe sometimes January, and it can go into August, September, October. That's when most folks try to burn. A lot of what we're trying to do from a quail standpoint, when we're burning, we're looking at March, April, and a little bit into May. The idea there being you don't want to burn down the quail's house in January and February when they need it the most. You don't want to burn them up in the summertime when they need that cover for brood rearing. And then you don't want to take away the cover in the fall right before the hawks migrate through. So like I say, if you're thinking strictly birds or quail, we like that May, April, and March time period. But sometimes growing season burns are appropriate. If you tell me, look, I've got just a tremendous sweet gum issue, I've got good habitat everywhere else, but I got this one block that's giving me fits with sweet gum, should I hit it in September, October? Sure, why not? Look, if you've got just a carpet of sweet gums that are 7 foot tall, you know what it's going to look like next year. It's not going to be quail habitat. Would it behoove you to go ahead, hit that in August, September, get those sweet gums gone, and then the following year you'll have good quail habitat? Sure, that makes sense. I'm okay with that. It's a matter of trade-offs. A lot of folks want a precise answer to a question, and in wildlife, it rarely is. It's well, there may be some trade-offs here or there. So you just got to figure out what you think's best at the time and go with that. So with that being said, if you got questions, call us. Jamie's a stewardship forester for this area. Call him, ask him. You know, Joe Berry's got contacts. Jeff Bellers is here. I'm here. You know, we've got folks in the area. Ask all of us. We're all going to give you a different opinion. There is no doubt about that. But you can look at us, ask us the same question, get 4 to 5 different answers, and then you can piece it together and go, okay, well, this is what I think's best. So all of us may be wrong, all of us may be right, but it'll, like I say, use your resources. Call us. We're here to go out and help you. I get talking and I forget to push the button. So the herbicide applications. Occasionally, you've got to use herbicide. Through no fault of our own, things happen, habitat gets out of the way, and you got to use it. If you can't burn and your sweet gums take over and you have to use herbicide, it happens. There are selective herbicides available. Most of our forestry work is done either with Garlon or Arsenal. So that's pretty common. It's typically going on right now with this extended drought that we've had. A lot of folks are waiting till next year to try to do their herbicide work. There's a little bit of fear that either the plants are shut down, not taking it down, or you know, either the leaves are dead and falling off. So it can be done aerially, it can be done with skidders, it can be done with backpacks. Like I say, you can make it as precision or surgical as you want. It's going to help your forest products. I mean, you're getting rid of a bunch of competition. your trees are going to benefit from this. Forest openings. You want that diversity across your landscape. Ideal size is 2 to 5 acres for a bobwhite. It doesn't have to be big. If it can be irregularly shaped, great. If not, okay. We try to tell folks you want it to be about 15–20% of your property. You want in open lands. It's gonna impact your timber revenue, obviously. I mean, if you're not growing trees there, you're not going to get any money from it most likely, unless you can figure out ways to compensate by grazing or what have you. But there's trade-offs. Like I say, when you're managed for bobwhites, there's trade-offs. It can be used as food plots. These 2 to 5 acres you can be winter food plots for deer. It can be summer food plots. It can be food plots for quail, or it can be left fallow. You can rotate them, which is typically what I tell folks. Look, use this one back here for a winter food plot for deer. Let it grow up. Next year, plant this one over here. Just rotate them around. Those fallow fields are fantastic for bobwhites. The key is having that open land for them. Woodland disking, winter disking. We do winter disking in agricultural settings. We do winter disking in woodland settings. If I could ask the governor to do one thing to make South Carolina better for bobwhites, it's to sell every bush hog we got and force people to use disc for land management. That disc is creating that disturbance again. It's scarifying seeds, it's creating bare ground, it's creating that habitat. It's doing the same thing that your bush hog's doing. It's knocking those weeds down, it's resetting succession, but it's just doing it in a way that's friendly to bobwhites. You do have to have open woodlands to do it in most situations. And you can see this isn't a perfect example of what I'm talking about when I talk about winter disking. This is most likely a fire break. It was just a good picture that I had available. Generally what I tell folks to do, look, it's November, December, January, February, you're sitting around, you don't have anything to do, you say, man, what could I do? Saturday afternoon, grab you a beer, get on your tractor, wander around through those pines, just drop your disc, enjoy your afternoon, get off and go, God created some good habitat today. Go back and look at it in the spring. Go back and look at it the next fall. It will be impressive, the difference between where you disc and where you didn't. And it does not have to be clean like this. If you break up third half of the plant, get it incorporated in the soil, you've done something. And like I say, it'll be very evident where you disc. One thing to note is take good notes. Say, I disc so-and-so acreage on this piece of my property at this time of the month. Go back and look and see what come up. And this is the response I had. Because when you disc is going to play a big part in what comes up. Generally speaking, if you disc in November and December, you're getting your higher component of weeds, forbs, legumes, that type stuff. Generally, if you disc in January and February, you're getting a higher component of grass. It's not always the case, but it's sort of the rule we go by. And it's going to change what's on my property. When I disc in November, it's going to be way different from what you disc in November, December. It's just what's that seed bank looks like. And generally speaking, everybody's got these native seeds. They're there, they're waiting to be exposed. More often than not, it just takes a little bit of discing to get them going. Daylighting roads is pretty beneficial for wildlife and maintenance of your roads. There's a lot of wildlife habitat that can be created along these edges of these woods roads just by leaving 20, 30 foot along your woods roads. Don't plant them, let them grow in early successional habitat, burn them with your regular stands, disc them in the wintertime, and it's going to give you a lot of acreage of habitat for not a lot of space. It's going to help you dry out your roads better. It's easy to do. Like I say, it's good habitat. You can mix it up. You can disc a third of it one year, disc a third of it another year. You can plant food plots on these areas. Like I say, you can sort of tailor it the way you want it. Like I say, they're pretty good. Reforestation considerations. Just like agriculture's changed in a lot in the last 50 or 60 years, forestry practices have done the same thing. It's a much cleaner version of forestry we practice today versus 50, 60 years ago. You know, if you could go back and start farming trees like they did 60, 70 years ago, would we have more quail? Maybe. I don't know, but it would look a lot different on the landscape for sure. Just in general, the wider you can space your trees, the better off you are. Why is that? It's taking longer for the canopy to close. You're keeping sunlight on the ground for longer. On suitable sites, longleaf pines preferred. Why? You can burn them earlier, you can burn them more often, and their growth structure, they're more vertical, they've got less limbs, they don't create as much shade. There's a lot of money available for longleafs too. There's money available for doing a lot of these forestry practices, installing disc, prescribed fire, herbicide work through the cost share programs. There's a lot of it available for all species of pines. There's an extra amount of it available for longleaf. Site prepping, you know, most everyone comes in, does a chemical site prep, sterilizes it for a couple of years, lets the longleafs come up. There's not many people that just push areas up, plants trees, lets them come up anymore. If you can do that, great. You know, are you sacrificing some trees? Probably, yes, absolutely. Will the trees still make it? Sure, some of them will. It just depends on what kind of trade-off you want with your birds versus your timber. Always that hardwood control. If we've got questions on this, I'll let Jamie answer them out in the field. Like I say, that wider spacing is pretty key. You're just extending that timber rotation. Well, this is an old version of the research that Corey was talking about earlier that was most recently done with Georgia. Georgia looked at managed for bobwhite, or properties with managed for bobwhites in particular, managing for just forestry, and then doing that sort of hybrid approach where you mix and match. But Corey was right, the big difference over the life of those stands, it was $100 an acre difference between managing for birds and managing for timber. And like I say, you could have knocked me over with a feather when I saw that, because I was thinking, man, there's got to be a big difference, but it wasn't a whole lot of difference when it comes to your money as far as managing for birds versus not. And the key takeaway is you're managing timber. I mean, it's growing those trees, and a lot of this stuff that's good for birds is good for trees. So, like I say, I've touched on this, and I'm hurrying through because we're behind already. And I've touched on some of this. The longer you can keep the stands in these conditions, the better off you are from a bobwhite standpoint. But I will say that Corey's right also. There's some folks going to a pulpwood rotation where they're just constantly keeping them in that young version of the stand, and that works pretty well for bobwhites too. So that's sort of new on the landscape, and it's an interesting way to think about things. So these are just some photos of some decent managed pines. This is sort of what you're looking for. You got the shrub cover, you got the forbs, you got your grasses. That's sort of what you're shooting for. So I realize that was pretty quick, but if anybody got any questions.
Do you know the name of that study or the authors on the study?
I can pull it up, and I am sure our contact information's in here, but
I can email it for you.
yeah, shoot me an email and I can get you a copy of it. But Breck, who was it? was it James Martin at UGA? Who did that? No, it wasn't James. Who was it that did that timber study?
Researcher in Georgia, I don't remember his name.
I'll email you.
But yeah, please do. If you anybody, if Jeff, do you know if is our contact information in there? Yeah.
Awesome,
Yeah.
thank you. You need it back?
Okay.
I can write it down. Actually, I'll just take a picture and hand it back.
No, you're good. I'm good. I got tons of them. So I think it's time for a break. So